how to tell you how much it means to me. Aging. I thought when I was young that being old I'll be wise, knowledgeable. Everything will flow naturally in wisdom. Well, I find that the companionship with the music which I learned when I was young was almost like in a relationship that you have with somebody, and they don't age the same way as you, or they don't age at all. As a matter of fact, the pieces of music that I learned when I was young remain very young. And they look at me and they tell me, remember when we met? Look now. And they're resplendishing, they're splendidly young. The piece reveals itself differently every time I look at it, hear it, teach it, replay it, revisit it, literally. And I say also, oh my God, do you remember? So in fact, I dialogue with the pieces I learned when I was young, just like in a relationship with somebody from a long time ago. The thing which I didn't know then, because when you're young and you discover a music piece, you know very well it was there before you. And you know that some, say like my friend in Paris Conservatory, scares the students telling them the text was there before you and it'll be there after you or us. So yes, it places us humbly in our little place in the timeline of things. But I must say that when I was young, I thought the pieces were young just because they were my present. And they're now also my present time, while I realize that somehow they look at me with a smile, sometimes a little bit sarcastic, and sometimes just affectionate, like, huh? We've seen others pass in front of us like you, huh? Oh, how beautiful, how meaningful, how emotional. Oh, how cheesy. Oh, and don't show too much. It's not the style, the genre. Oh, it's not supposed to be this way. Don't you know? And then the fashions change. Even the usage of the pieces change. Some people say, oh, it's not, it used to be too much played. Now we don't do as much. We do this or that. It's in fact beautifully evolving, and when I teach it to students in turn, I feel like I'm compelled to give them not my personal point of view, which in a way is overly tainting the piece. I'm trying to stay very objective as much as I can with the meaning of the sentence, the storytelling, the way that you organize the persuasive eloquence of the piece. In some pieces, the texture is so rich that you can get lost between bringing out this without to drop that, and then organize it on top of this, and it becomes like some kind of priorities competition. The harmony, the bass line, the melodic line, the secondary voice. Everything is beautiful, but not as meaningful, but it is. I can hum it, sing it, chew it, solfege it, play it. But at the end of it, when you perform it, is one time through. And it has to happen in the sequence of the events of the composer's choice. I didn't choose in which order is the first or second theme. And most of these pieces written in the 19th century about expressing the Romantic era's meaningful human passions and human emotions and human expressions, breaking out the form of the early 18th century. So, yes, but men, meaning the gender, are the ones who wrote the poems and who wrote the music and who wrote the storytelling and who wrote the passions of men and their desire and their need of climax, and then the desire to express musically or aesthetically the art forms are all expressing the world, psychologically speaking, as seen from the point of view of men, since it was in the Western Europe a men's society. Women were the wives or the daughters to be exchanged in weddings for estates and all. Even Clara, even Fanny, yeah, they were stifled. Even if Schumann loved her and appreciated her, Clara or Mendelssohn's father deciding that, yeah, Felix is the one, and God forbids he was the one. But then the way of expressing heroism in the Liszt sonata, heroism in the Chopin sonata, is all between idealized version of the nobility of the army, the soldier hero, the patriotic feeling, all these manly things, in fact. And women were also typecasted in the second theme, in the motherly theme, in the calm kind. And I know it's very cliche. Unfortunately, yes, it went as far as Schumann writing a whole cycle of beautiful lieder songs on a text written by a man, and the text is explaining the life and the love of a woman, but seen, felt, expressed by men. What if, provocatively, women were given the chance to also be acknowledged as artists, creators? Perhaps the second theme would have been the manly theme, and the first theme would have been the female theme, as they used to call it in the Haydn sonata form, in the other way. And of course, all these cliches today, thank God, in most of the countries, and not all, have evolved beyond that in tolerance, in understanding, in empowerment of people who were usually not empowered or were shut down. I think it's marvelous. It's marvelous. May it change the state of mind, which unfortunately is the last thing that changes in humanity. But still, perhaps it will take a generation or two, who knows? And how people will look at it in the past. Because after all, ultimately, we all serve the muse, and the music is, the gender is secondary. Of course, you can argue that psychologically, yes, and sociologically, mostly, that was the 19th century. When you hear the heroism and the tenderness, it's seen as a man sees it. Wrong or right, Brahms, Schumann, Liszt, Chopin, Mendelssohn. And what would have been if, for instance, Franck's last movement of the sonata, I like to say it as a joke because I think it's nicer to use humor to diffuse something that in fact is a terrible way to denounce the way people were treated. When Franck composed the violin and piano sonata, it was a wedding gift for Isaïe. And of course, Isaïe was the most famous Belgian violinist at the time. And so the wedding gift, the fourth movement, the famous theme is played in canon between the marriage bliss, but woman walking 2 steps behind man. I mean, come on, that is cheesy. But it was in the mentality. Look, in letters, Clara writes after Schumann's death, way after, she almost survived him 4 decades after his early death, and tragically in the asylum and all. And she writes, after all, he was right. No woman wrote a major piece in music. How formatted by their time, this extremely intelligent, fiercely independent women. She never remarried with all these 8 children after Schumann, and she concertized and provided. I mean, that's amazing. That's heroism to me. Much more than the representation of the 19th century sold desk soldiers. Well, of course, that also is very attractive because every generation, every time period creates its own heroes. You know, it's normal. Somebody has to be the role model. And I was lucky that my role model was in what 84-year-old lady when I was 7, and I didn't consider her either like my grandma, either like some kind of I don't know. For me, she was music in person, but without a gender. Perhaps because I was open-minded and without prejudice as a very young child in music, in societal things. And she was so open-minded, Mademoiselle Boulanger, that she didn't reduce the composer she taught us to the anecdotic knowledge she knew personally of them, which would have belittled them because they're human. After all, and that doesn't justify their works, it doesn't explain them either. It makes it more meaningful and nice to have had memories with them in person compared to us who didn't, or I did with some that my students didn't. But that doesn't make me understand them better, that I knew them. I understand them better when I dialogue with their music. As I said, since we work on their pieces, it becomes companionship through life in music. And their music talks to me renewed. And in a way, I look at it and say, you know, when I replay you, I feel I'm again in this marvelous moment where I discovered you the first time when I sight read you. These arpeggios of D flat major could have been just, but in the sixth nocturne, Fauré uses a minor second, a major, a third with a major, a third with a minor. Unguessable patterns until you really know it. And then the melody. And the melody of the bass. And the harmony and the melody and the bass and all this. Okay, fine. You can define them, you can mention them as I just did. Naming them doesn't A, explain them, or B, explain how they blend, how they enter in fusion with each other. The harmony, the melody, the delay resolution, the expression of elegance, emotion and affection, but not too much. Rubato, but when, where, why. Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, emotional but withheld, or emotional and abandoned. We develop our own sense of the right emotion. Not overstated, because then people will say it's cheesy, and it's a sort of a double-edged sword word, because it sort of shuts down all the effort. But sometimes cheesy is good too, to be honest. Really. And I think that over-intellectualizing music doesn't make it rather better. I think it depends on the texture. It depends on the innuendos. It's like a chosen word in a poem in a language you don't speak. How can you even understand the secondary ideas that come out of the word's innuendos, that the choice of the word, la note juste, as Mademoiselle used to say for the notes. So the right tone as well as the right note, but also the right expression. Nor too much, nor too little. Not shy, not overstated. And the bad taste of one is the good taste of the other. The shy of the one is the reserved of the other. The overexpressive of the one is the caricatural of the other. I mean, who's to know? And who decides? Who's the arbiter of the good manners in music? And when we don't know the piece or the composer's music world compared to the ones that are established and studied and performed and learned and listened to as you grow up as a musician anywhere in the music world where they have music schools, the Brahms, the Schumann, the Beethoven, the Mozarts, but then what about the Fauré exactly? Or the Mettners, the famous, infamous ones. They're famous because they have a name, but they're not always taught, played, or immersed in like you do for when you meet with, musicians with aplomb and already with gravitas. And they say, I've never played this before. So they try to connect it to something that they can relate to in order to express it, but that doesn't make it right. It makes it attractive, but it doesn't make it right. Horowitz playing the Nocturne by Fauré sounds like Scriabin, which is so beautiful for that, but not for Fauré. And in Fauré, you have to have a certain way of developing the phrase, certain way of going beyond the need of a, not that you want to avoid, as I used to say, the climax, but you don't yearn for it in order to drop out of it. You use it as a continuum of arousal in the musical expression that's talks about the yearning for a perfection or a uplifting of the spirits. It's a spirituality ultimately, even if it's not a sacred piece of music. In a way, it elevates us to shape the sound, to shape the phrase, to shape the cadence, the suspension, the delay, resolution, the canonic, the overlapping, and how to decide or define or choose how to hierarchize what to bring first, what to keep showing, how not to get distracted by some other inner voice that is so attractive while continuing the line. What are the guidelines of the right texture display? In fugue, in aria, imitation of the piano, you have secondary voices, you have primary voices, you have accompaniments, but you have then equal voices too. And so you have to be able to follow several at the same time for the different characters that they display. Of course, most of them don't have lyrics, thank God. Sometimes lyrics, I find with age, I find that when you have the knowledge of the language, you realize that language evolves, therefore a text of the past is universal as it is in its message. It's very dated in its choice of words because the daily language of this usage of this language has evolved. But the music that is set on them, opera, art song, cantata, or church music, or then all of a sudden the music is eternally young. It's not even young. It's never aged. It's present. But the words can be passé. And when you have music without words, and it always expresses some kind of a uplifting phrasing, direction, line, arching towards a destination which you yearn to because you don't want to betray what you believe or love in it or how much you practiced in order to find the right balance of it. And then you want to be convincing while you want to be convinced, and you want to share it, and you want to bring the audience to you in order to be inside this beautiful ecosystem of this given author, with the chosen sounds, harmonies, or dissonances, or musical language, or new system of tonality that, or atonality that you need to study as a foreign language for each book. But with patience and passion and love, intelligence and intuition combined, you can reach incredible understanding of things for which you're not destined at the get-go because of the place where you're born. You didn't choose when, where, and what. But you can open to a culture that in fact means to your soul as if you've meant it before in another life, unrelated to the musical or human world of your surrounding. So in a way, we develop tastes for some ancient times or for some ancient or distant cultures and civilizations which we discover, and we get passionate enough to search how to know more about them and read about them and search about them and research about them and rediscover them. That's so meaningful that we feel like a sense of purpose that nobody tells us. There's no plan when you're born telling you you're gonna do this, 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 and that. Well, few people are told that, but I don't think that even they believe in it. I think destiny is a suite of accidents of life which in hindsight give an impression of a meaningful direction. And sometimes you have to take the advantage of those accidents of life. As painful, as unfair, as disorienting in one's life's aim as it might sound. And that's perhaps the wisdom, like when you prepare to practice so much so that on stage when you mention, you express the piece in its entirety one time, It's almost like living life. It's one time. It's a beautiful analogy. You don't restart. You can learn and redirect yourself from the mistakes you've made or that you have acknowledged when you have acknowledged them. But generally, doesn't work right away. It's a long path. And at the same time, it's humbling and it's vulnerable and it's incredibly difficult to put oneself under question every time one plays a piece. It's like psychologically exhausting, and it's not about being narcissistic and selfish, because in a way it's only involving yourself, but through yourself you enlighten others through the works that you play of others to them, so you become a hyphen that brings something that is so fulfilling soulfully that it means to them so much, even if it wasn't meant, like in a church service or in I don't know, commending speech for an ideology. Of course you have to be convinced, not forcefully through music, but let the music express it and try to find how you define the characters and how you understand the ecosystem of the time period which it was composed in, but it is in your present and is the present of the audience. So you cannot constantly only refer to that past in which it was conceived or for which it was conceived, because something inside these incredibly intemporal creations, would it be a painting, a poetry, a film, any form of art, is bringing humanity somewhere away from where it came from, towards new horizons to discover innerly, which can inspire the most beautiful things, descendants or artistic, pedagogical, familial. The need to transmit, the need to have said something that you understood, that you vibrated to the beauty of life, of music, of art, of science, something that just marveled you. And I think music is a great, if not only, medium that doesn't need to explain itself, even if I spend my life teaching it. So I am explaining the unexplainable, that the hint is an exaggeration. The understanding has to just be something that you soak in until a moment you become the piece. Even if it's one time through that you go through this path and you rediscover it differently because of the people who hear you at the same time, it's so beautiful. And so you practice in order to deal with the unexpected when you play it through, not in order to lock it in how you rehearsed it, because it never comes out the same, just because nothing is the same. Everything is constantly a variation of what was, and especially if you prepare towards something. You cannot and you shouldn't dream to think, especially in performance in classical music, that you practice to lock in things so that they can be reliable no matter what. Yes, it helps to have some dosage of autopilot performance where you think the music you want to do, like a conductor who doesn't touch an instrument and a pianist doesn't touch a string, because we play through the action. But in a way you imagine, dream, project yourself in the piece before you've started, and you go the beginning of the Appassionata. You can also stop and think it's not a grace note, it's a 16th note. It has to be released after the decay of the first longer note, but not too much, because if not I'll have accent. But I hear it connected because musically it's intense, but I don't want to ignore in denial the decay. And then once I start doing that kind of work, I end up by forgetting what it means. Whoops. Wrong. Beethoven was not bitonal, at least. So you project so much of your inner world outside. And either your fingers betray you, or your pedal, or your memory, or a distraction. who knows what. While it's annoying and infuriating, especially if it's a mistake like I just did in a place I've never done it before, typical of what my students tell me. Gosh, the difficult sections went through quite well, but I made a mistake in a place I never made it before. It's because we are such beautifully complex through the brain and the psyche and the emotion, soulful creatures, that when we enter in touch with these works that mean to us so much, we cannot not be touched by them in a way that we become inevitably vulnerable, even if we have a technique to resist it or to control the uncontrollable. Oh, the keyboard doesn't sound the same way. In this acoustic, I feel the keyboard heavier, but this other piano sounded better. And in fact, we have an idealized version of the piece in our hearts and minds and souls, and we try to match it when we play it, and when we don't, we're disappointed with ourselves, which is a good thing because it makes us yearn for more. But at some point, and there it is, I'm on the wrong side of the salt shaker now. Well, it's a way to talk. And I realized that I still have to discover more of what they mean. These pieces I discovered when I was young, let less the one since. Teaching is humbling, performing is humbling, exchanging about the music is humbling, the style, the intention of the composer, what is a rubato for this and not for that, and how do we count, how do we beat, how do we pace the piece, because it's not just sounds and harmonies, it's also pulse, rhythm, how we blend all these, how do we betray ourselves, or how do we evolve into the way we used to think it, and we think, oh, that was wrong, I shouldn't have thought that this way. Why did I play it so slow, or why did I play it so fast, when you hear old recordings of yourself? As if it was not you playing, and you listen to yourself 30, 40 years later going, I shouldn't have done that. Though you did it with conviction then too. And Mademoiselle Boulanger always insisted that I proceed with unforgiving criticism to myself and incredibly open and tolerant attitude towards the others. That has been very tough to follow as a guideline in life. I believe it takes a saint to fulfill it truly, if you really take it at heart. It's so more reassuring to always find a good excuse for oneself and be so critical of everybody else. In a way, it feels good to say it, because in fact it is true. It's human nature. Of course, we strive to go above and beyond all these perhaps low denominator pushing us lower in human esteem, but you know, I think it's worth trying. Regardless if you succeed, as the philosopher said, it's not the destination that counts, it's the trip. And I really am very honored that I'm given a chance to highlight some of these ideas of the trips of the students whom I feel by intuition, how they combine what their calling calls them to do, and how much I can teach them some things without to overstate it either. How to find the right portion of teaching the good taste or the right taste to my taste. It's not teaching myself through them, well too, but I try to extract out of myself and think about them. Gosh, in this tempo it can be so nice, even if I wouldn't do it. Thank you.